Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Hello, my constant listener and my new listener. Thank you to everyone who has shown up for today's podcast, and I look forward to discussing with you something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is owl. I can't remember a time in my life where I haven't been captivated by an owl. I grew up on a farm, and it was fairly isolated. I was able to observe, hear, and watch owls in various forms for many, many years of my life. I also like, as a side note, if you ever watch scary movies or movies about the quote-unquote occult or things along those lines, pay attention to, number one, how many full moons there are, and number two, how many times do you hear an owl. And it is sort of homage, I think, to the relationship between mysticism, the spooky, and the owl. Owl for me has been so important that it is one of the largest tattoos on my back, and it has been with me for years to help me to see. So just taking it a little bit from where is the owl from a shamanic perspective. Some people refer to it as a sign or a symbol of intuition, divine identity, clairvoyance, a mystery keeper, a mystery teacher. Many people use, that I've spoken to, many different practitioners of shamanism who do soul retrieval work, use or work with the owl in their ability to see things from a soul retrieval perspective. I think that owls see that which others can't, obviously, which often leads to its solitary nature. And I think that what it does is it lends its ability to see deeper within. Like I said, it is an ally for soul retrieval because it is for seeing the healing within that needs to be attended to and know what medicine is right to heal it. Sometimes if I feel lost, the owl will help me find my way back and will help me find my way back to my wisdom. I think that owl teaches me how to see beyond the shadows. They teach me how to see in the darkness. They teach me how to fly into the darkness where others fear to tread, and to gather wisdom and knowledge and fly from the darkness back into the conscious state to share wisdom and knowledge. And the only way out is through, as the owl taught. The only way out of my fear or out of darkness is to fly into darkness, to fly into the shadow and bring back that aspect, or bring back what lessons owl has to give us. The snowy owl I'm going to talk about a bit, not because I have a very deep relationship shamanically with snowy owl, but because I love the snowy owl. I actually am not allowed to have a snowy owl either in the real world, so I'm thinking roadkill, or in the through my trance work or my journey work, because my spirits have told me that I'm not old enough, and when I'm old enough they'll send me snowy owl. I think that as similar with all white animals, the snowy owl signifies a purity that helps me to work in the darkness, certainly both in my own darkness and in the darkness of others. The snowy owl can also help me to look into the tucked away spirits, the tucked away secrets. I work with the owl when I'm looking for not just the snowy owl, but the owl in my soul retrieval work. I work with the owl because it flies high above me. The other aspect of the owl that I respect above and beyond many things is its ability to fly silently. As we know, birds' wings or birds' skeletons their bones are hollow. The way that the feathers of the owl are so light, everything about the owl is designed simply to be a stalker, and often a night stalker. Some owls have been named night eagles, and they are very intense birds of prey who have no qualms about going in for a kill. Their silence is an aspect of their silent wisdom. I was watching a documentary and they had 3 different birds fly over very sensitive microphones. And the first bird they had was a pigeon. And if I'm sure there are very few of us in the world who don't know the sound of a pigeon, and a pigeon has got to be one of the loudest flyers I've ever heard. The second bird that they used was a hawk, and the microphones picked up the sound of the hawk, and although the hawk's wings were quieter than that of the pigeon, it was still an audible flight. When they released the owl to fly across the microphones, there was zero sound. Zero sound. That was, for me, a very strong message of the symbol of silent wisdom, the symbolism of insights from being still and from being calm. The other aspect of it is to the void. That void is silent, the great mystery, that place that calls forth wisdom and knowledge and secrets that have lain dormant for so very, very long. And that the owl might help us in flying into the void and the darkness so that we and myself can remember the fullness of my being, and that I may help to create a new world around me. The owl is a friend in regard to helping me to see literally. There's one story, one of my favorite stories. Well, there's lots of stories, but one of the stories that I really like to tell, because it is so prevalent, was I was doing some healing work. This was quite a few years ago, on someone who was having a brief episode with their eyes, and their eyes were filling up with a shadow and a film. And I shape-shifted into the owl. When we do extraction work, one of the ways that we remain protected is we merge with our helper that is going to help us do the extraction work. I merged with the owl, and what the owl did was it ate the illness out of the body. So as a physical form, I knelt over the body of the woman that I was doing the healing work on, and I sucked into my body that which was not necessary in her body. For the next 24 hours, I was spitting this very vile smell and looking, I don't know what it was, excretions from the body, for lack of a better word. And I kept regurgitating, which is part of the owl's wisdom. There are shamans that have been found that, especially the female shamans. I was reading a book from Maria Gumbatas, and she is an archaeologist, and what she was able to locate in a couple of the tombs that she was in Northern Europe was the shamans, the female shamans, were buried with their magic pouches, and in their pouches were often owl pellets. Owl pellets is the regurgitation of what is not needed by the body of the owl. So it could be the bones, the teeth, the fur, whatever the owl cannot digest is then brought up as an owl pellet. And we can see from that symbolism alone that the owl is very picky in choosing exactly what is necessary to sustain us and throwing away that which is not necessary and that which does not sustain us. And for me, in the process of doing the sucking extraction and becoming the owl, I felt that my body was regurgitating, like the owl pellets, everything that my body didn't need. And I certainly didn't need this person's illness. I didn't need the film across my eyes. What I did hear from the person that the owl chose to work with was that her sight continually improved over the next 2 months to the point where she no longer required the drastic measures that the optometrist wanted her to go through in order to, quote unquote, help her vision or bring her vision back to normal. So by the time she was able to see her specialist, the symptoms which prompted the initial necessity to see the specialists were no longer there. Now, whether it was truly the body simply healing itself without any magical intervention, or whether it was the body healing itself and the shamanic intervention working in consort, or that the shamanic intervention was able to remove all of the illness, I can't say. It was only one time, it was only one experience, and only one one experience, so I don't have something to draw from, something to compare with. The other part of owl is I've worked with owl for a number of years and with snake, but I was at a music festival, a rural music festival, when my children were very small. So I was in my mid to late 20s. And it was very, very dark. There was no moon that night. And we had camped far away from the stages because it was very loud. And I did have small children. So we had quite a ways to walk. And there's quite a bit to carry because there's nighttime blankets, etc., etc., etc. And my daughter was very upset. She was very tired. She was very upset. And she was crying that she couldn't see. How could she walk? She needed to see. So I told her that I would lend her my owl eyes, and I blew into her eyes, and I could see the owl leaving my mouth, and I could see the owl leaving my body, and I was looking down at her, and she turned around and she looked and she exclaimed, "Oh my, I can see everything." And I looked up and I thought to myself, "Oh my, I can see nothing." So that was truly proof in the pudding that the owl does lend me her vision and her sight. Once we got back to the tent and I got them tucked in and nice and warm, I did take my owl's eyes back from her and I sucked them out of her eyes, and I could see again the owl entering into my body. There are practical applications as well as spiritual applications to working with your spirit kin, working with your power animals. We often think that, or I run into oftentimes people talking about how much help they have from their power animals or their spirit kin in the spirit world. And when I ask them to translate how that works into the physical world, sometimes people give me very elaborate and very wise and insightful messages and lessons that they have learned from their own experience with their power animals. And some people have no relationship or cannot yet translate between the spirit world and the physical world. Hence, what I mean by that is that they have not yet identified how their spirit kin or their power animal helps them in their day-to-day life and can actually affect them on a physical basis. The owl, from the perspective of spirituality, is exploring the unknown, the mysteries of life in this fascinating field of exploration. The owl sees in the dark, and the owl guides us beyond the veil of deception and illusion, and the owl helps me to see what's kept hidden. I like that the owl can symbolize the ability to cut through illusions and see the real meaning of someone's action or state of mind. I have strong intuition, and working with the owl has only enabled me to increase my intuition or increase the accuracy of my intuitive impressions. It is a good being to work with for the spirit of discernment and making decisions based on solid foundations. I like that the owl also helps me to fly into the deep night of my own soul and helps me to let go of whatever truly is keeping me from my authentic self or from my higher self, my spiritual self. The owl helps me to see what is the best interests for me. I've also used the owl as a way of going through discernment to find out who might be stealing some of my energy or who may be using some of my identity. There are times when I notice that when I'm around somebody or if I'm going to an event, I often will journey ahead of the time and see what I can see in the room. Owl is one of the spirits that will fly above a building or fly above the room for me in order to give me, quote unquote, the best bird's eye view from that perspective. There is also the impact of health and energy, and there are times when I find myself being very tired and sometimes doing a lot of really intense spirit work. And I like to utilize the owl to be my guide, to take me into the cave of myself or into the cave of my psyche, into the cave of my most protected self, and leave me there in order to recover my true sense of self and in order to regurgitate what I've taken in that I don't need anymore, and to regurgitate that which no longer serves me. I really like there are many different traditions and many different people who have owls or who have owl within their ideology, within their own traditions. And whether you come from a First Nations tradition or whether you come from an African tradition, even the Celts, every single one of them had their very own idea of what the owl was or was not. Owl feathers, I find, are, to me, used most effectively for clearing and cleaning the body. So I have owl wings that I have made into feather fans, and this is all made from the gifts of spirit in the form of roadkill. And with any bird of prey, I have always taken my animals to the Fish and Wildlife and turned them in and have received certificates of ownership so that I may own a bird of prey and not be subjected to the fines. I don't know if that is something that is in your area where you live, whether you have to have a certificate of ownership to indicate that you didn't kill the animal, but rather that the animal has died of natural causes and you're allowed to own it. if I didn't do that, there are substantial fines that can be levied against you. Snowy owl feathers, for instance, if you're caught with snowy owl feathers and you don't have the proper paperwork to go with it, it can be upwards of a $2,500 fine. So I take these things very seriously. I also take it seriously because these are very sacred animals. And if I need to follow a legal path in order to access their sacredness, then I wish to do that. I wish to honor all avenues of that sacred being and honor all aspects of that sacred being, even if that includes involving the government of the province that I live with. I don't take offense to that by any stretch of the imagination. I take less offense to paying $10.50 for a certificate than I would paying $2,500 for my own procrastination, because that's normally what it would be procrastination. The owl has been also in my car for many years as a being that flies ahead and allows me to see the intentions of drivers 3 or 4 cars or 5 cars ahead of me, especially if I'm driving on a very busy highway with hundreds of other vehicles on that will pass me or travel with me on whatever journey I'm going on. I also know that Sandra Ingerman talks about the relationship she has with the owl, and in that relationship, when she flies, she asks the owl to be her protector and to protect the plane as the plane is flying. I think that's a really valuable use. I know that I've strongly called upon owl when I've been driving at nighttime and when I've been driving in the fog or through a nighttime blizzard. And I have found that my ability to see does improve, and I rely upon the relationship with owl in order to help me see, quote unquote, through everything that I've been doing. The owl, from the perspective of the awakening, the intuitive, the empath, the mystery, the awareness, for me, I put the owl oftentimes in the west of the medicine wheel because it is a creature that flies at dusk and at dawn as well as during the nighttime hours. I use it in the west, or place it in the west, out of great respect, along with the bear, because both of them are very well suited for recognizing what is out of place within the environment. A bear is very cautious in their environment, especially around their dens or their usual sleeping places in the summer when they're not using their dens. They're very cautious about where it is that they are. Owls are very aware of what is around them, not only because they have eyes that have a visual acuity that we could only dream of, and they have ears that use echolocation in order to determine where a creature is within their 360-degree world that they live in. They have extra vertebrae in their neck, and I believe they can turn their neck 270 degrees, which gives it the impression of turning completely around. That in and of itself is a symbol of being able to take in what you're experiencing from many different angles, and to remember to utilize your periphery vision, and to remember to turn around and look at things in many different ways and see things from many different perspectives. I like the echolocation of the owl and the use of its ears because we often tend to disregard or take away from ourselves the importance of listening, the importance of hearing what is going on underneath the snow, underneath the leaves. So again, we come back to that ability to discern. The owl is also used when like I said, I had owl wings that I've made feather fans into. I also have the tail of an owl that I've used into a feather fan. The only time I bring that is when I know that there is very deep work that has to be done, whether it's in a circle, whether it's in a ritual, whether it's in a particular lesson that I'm teaching for that day, if I'm doing a workshop. The owl comes if I'm working with curses or if I'm working with shadow work. Then I really bring that power and that punch of the owl with me, because I think it is a very potent spirit to bring along. And the sound that is made with the wings when it's forced. When the owl is flying, the owl is in control of the feathers that, if you've studied birds and their ability to utilize their wings as modes of transportation to change direction or to change the way that they fly up or down, they're individual, the wings or the feathers that they have on the exterior of their wing or the very back of their wing operate differently than the feathers that they would have closer to the shoulder or closer to the inside of their body. And they have different control of the feathers based on where it is placed on the wing and also on the tail. And their feet also come into play with their direction and with the ability to land and their ability to float somewhere. And I tend to see that as utilizing my senses and all of my body in order to find out what is around me. So when I use the tail feathers for the fan, there's nothing silent about it. But because it is such a large piece of feathers, it's a very wide feather fan, not as wide as an open wing, but the feathers from the tail of this particular owl, and it comes from a great horned owl, so the tail feathers are very long, and it creates a lot of wind. And the sensation of smudging people with that particular fan is very profound, and oftentimes I can see the effect on people's eyes, or people shake in order to get that feeling, or they shake off what's been dislodged. So I find that the owl feathers are very good for taking off that energetic attachment or what lies on the shoulders, and using the feathers to brush the body or to tap the body with the feathers is also another tool or way to use feathers to help or to engage that form of healing or cleansing, really cleansing. So more aura cleansing, body cleansing by using the feather fans. And having owl in the West in that unconscious self, that dream self, that psyche self, and the fact that the owl is related so much to darkness, also in that way I think is how it has been lent to superstition. There are many different superstitions. I've heard the owl call my name, making a reference to the owls calling your name prior to you dying. And then the owl call as a bad omen in Africa, in northern Africa, when they hear an owl, especially at night, it is an omen of good luck, that the morning is going to bring good things for them. So and then there's the owl of Freya, or not Freya, but Athena. And the owl of Athena is her aspect of divination and intuition and insight. And so she has been associated for many years with the owl, and her have been partners for many years in the mythology of the psyche from the Roman mythology. So we have owl bones that have been dated over 60 million years. So the owl has been a night eagle, for lack of a better word, or for a fun use of that term, for many, many years. And we have seen owl feathers and owl bones in the tombs, and the owl pellets in the tombs of our holy people, our sacred people, our medicine people, our shamans. So there has to be that connection for millennia. We have to maintain that knowledge, or we have to have that knowledge in the unconscious, or that collective unconscious, or I don't believe we would be so intrinsically attracted to that of the owl. Different owl species for different peoples but have different meanings. So the screech owl, as we can determine because the sound of the screech, would be an owl that would be used in your spirit world perhaps as a sign of danger, or as that which flies ahead of you to warn you of what is coming. The snowy owl, working in the north, working with the medicine of the ancestors, working with the medicine of the dark time. The barred owl is a very beautiful owl, very small owl, very deceptive owl, in that it sounds big, but it really isn't very big at all. There are owls that have red eyes, and owls in some legends, when they have the yellow eyes, it is said that they can see through the dark because their eyes have maintained the sun, and they bring the sun to them at night. But oftentimes, owls are born with yellow eyes, and as they age, many owl species, their eyes become red, and there is a change within their ability to see and with the acuity of their sight. I think they are probably, to me, one of the most fascinating and beautiful creatures that take up the night sky. I have been very fortunate to see many different types of owls as I have traveled the world. I tend to try to research what is in a particular country that I'm going to. What type of bird of prey might I see? What type of animal might I see that I may become familiar with, or that I may come to know? And if I find that there are very unique owls, when I journey to the spirit of the land prior to arriving, I tend to seek out the spirit of the owl of that particular land and pay special homage and ask if there is anything I can do when I'm in this country or in that other place that would honor the spirit of the owl. The same as when I come to a particular place and I journey to meet the spirit of the land. So when I went to Belize, I did a journey to the spirits that I knew would be active in Belize, and I was able to leave offerings in regards to what the spirits of that land needed. And they had very beautiful birds, and I was very able and very fortunate to see a few of the birds in the wild as I went on some of the hiking expeditions. Owls are such a beautiful part of our North American landscape, but they are, I believe, in almost every single continent in the world, except for perhaps, I know they're not in in Antarctica. I do not know where they are in relation to other continents, such as in South America, the deeper parts of South America, or in some of the hotter climates. But owls, if they've been around 60 million years, the chances of them adapting to many different environments is really very high. I hope that you have the opportunity to have a relationship with owl, if indeed that calls to you. And if you have a culture, you come from a culture where the owl is seen as a suspicious being, or a being who is that which brings bad omens, I would ask that you look into why that particular creature brings bad omens, why the owl is associated with bad omens. Our cosmology teaches us so very much about our ancestors and about how they survived in their natural world, how they survived by bringing their own brand of wisdom forward to teach their own offspring, who indeed would teach their offspring, and eventually come down to the lessons that you and I are having. So I strongly encourage you, if you come from a tradition with a particular teaching, to research what is the depth or what is the knowledge of that, and look into some archaeology at that time and find out what the living conditions were, what the animals were, what they lived on. And this topic really could go on and on. So I wanted to thank you for your kind attention and for your listening, and for your comments and your thoughts, and for sharing with me where you are in your journey and where you are on the path of the shaman. And I truly hope that the owl can inspire you to look more deeply into yourself, look at the intentions, look at the hidden shadows. I bid you a fond farewell. Until next time, thank you for listening, and head on over to Shaman's Way. There are some new articles that are published, and you may find them of interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.